No helicopters have been procured for me to go to golf course. Thank you.
I never said he wasn't a great politician. I'm just saying he's a officer.
It's supposed to be an interview.
How'd you play out there today?
Well, I found the conditions challenging, mostly because there's no grass on the golf course, but there never has been.
I'm thinking about the swag bag, and I had high hopes for the swag bag.
When you got 3 crevices on the green, your course is trash.
What's happening, folks? Welcome back. Beltway Golfer, episode 21. Alex Dixon here. May have noticed took 2 or 3 weeks off since the last published episode. You know, we figured knocked out 20 episodes in about 5 months since early June. Wanted to regroup a little bit, take in the fall Masters, which was terrific, before we put our heads down and lined up a bunch more guests and knocked out another 20. So here we are. To kick us off for this next round of 20 is Michael Williams of GolfWRX. Michael is a really interesting guy. He's a native Washingtonian. He's the host of his own show, The 19th Hole, which has been a part of the GolfWRX for some time. I was reminded during our conversation that it actually started on 106.7 WJFK. He has had numerous roles in the golf industry despite coming to the game later in life. One of the most interesting is that in DC, he was with Golf Course Specialists for about 7 years. Golf Course Specialist being the concessionaire for decades prior to National Links Trust, who ran Langston, East Potomac, and Rock Creek. So he's got some interesting perspective as far as all that's concerned. Also, just a lot of our conversation was about his history and his upbringing in DC, which is relevant, especially as it pertains to why I originally reached out to him to be a part of the show, which was really in response to something he wrote earlier this year in 2020. During all of the social unrest and demonstrations going on around social injustice and police brutality in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Michael wrote a letter, an open letter to the golf industry. And his letter was really in response to maybe what he viewed as an unprepared response by PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan. And he wrote a lengthy letter with some suggestions, some proposals, some ideas on what the golf industry can do better to promote diversity, especially at the highest levels of the game, where most people acknowledge that it's been is an ongoing issue. It's pretty homogenous, certainly from a race standpoint, at the highest levels of the sport. And you know, I really wanted to sit down with Michael and hear about the reaction to his letter, the feedback he got, and just dive a little deeper into some of his thoughts and ideas on where the state of the game is in respect to the topics in the letter that he wrote. So I'm going to share the links to his articles, and including the letter that he posted on GolfWRX. But I thought it was an interesting conversation to learn more about his perspective and just his life in golf. So here it is, episode 21, Beltway Golfer, Michael Williams.
Okay, Michael Williams, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. I'm good. Sitting here in DC with you, and just trying to stay on the right side of the flowers this year. And survive everything that's going on, and everything's 2021. It's all gravy once we get to that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to kind of have our first real conversation. You and I've been a fan of your work for a while. We only first met recently at the soon to be broadcasted long drive challenge that happened downtown in the mall, which I'm excited to see in the Golf Channel. But I was excited to meet you, and thank you for agreeing to come on and being a part of the Beltway Golfer.
Well, it's really my pleasure. I'm always a big fan of anybody who's doing anything to promote golf in DC. I grew up in DC. I'm from DC, born and raised. Haven't always lived here. I've lived overseas, lived in a lot of places, different places. And, hopefully, well, not hopefully, I definitely did pick up a lot of wonderful experiences and a lot of friends along the way. But golf really changed the trajectory of my life in a very, very positive way. So anything that I can do to tell that story in the hopes that it does the same thing for someone else, I'm happy to participate in that.
Absolutely. So where you are, because we're going to go into kind of the history of you and how you got into golf and kind of your journey through golf, because you've had some interesting roles to lead you where you are now, which is you host a weekly podcast on GolfWRX called The 19th Hole.
That's correct.
But you also host some political shows as well. Is it Voice of America? Did I get that right?
That's true. I host Issues in the News. It's the flagship English language politics show on Voice of America. The show is I moderate it. We have two panelists on the show who are very talented and esteemed journalists from newspapers and magazines that news agencies from around the world who are Washington, D.C. correspondents. It's a half an hour show. We go really fast and we go deep on the 3, 4, maybe 5 big subjects of the week. And, I'm very excited by the fact that it's listened to by close to 20 million people around the world every week. So it's mostly outward facing, though, with Voice of America. So very often I'll get a Zoom or a Lyft driver or Uber driver says, "Sir, I know you. I know that voice, sir.
Right.
I recognize that voice. Are you with Voice of America?" Like,
20 million people. I mean, those are legit numbers. So, and that would explain why it was hard to schedule this with you recently, because you also cover politics, and there's been some politics, with the election and everything going on. So a busy time of year for you.
It has been a crazy time of year. I also serve as a Washington correspondent for one of the news networks in Australia. So we've been basically going every night, covering from 2 weeks before to today, sort of nonstop with the elections with Australia. Love doing the work for those guys. It's an awesome network with really wonderful and talented people. The only problem is that live shots go on at 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning. So, so heading into the studio around 2 o'clock on Capitol Hill, it's sort of jacks around with your sleep cycle. But
I can imagine. That's
I'll sleep on January 21st. That's fine.
There you go. So in this conversation, there's a lot I want to cover and learn about you. A big piece that I know you caught a lot of attention this year. With everything going on in 2020, not just COVID and pandemic related, but the social upheaval that happened this summer, and still is happening a bit. And you wrote an open letter to golf, which I want to talk about, and what has happened since you wrote that letter, some of the other interviews and conversations you've had. But we will get to that. I prefer to start kind of at the beginning of how you got into golf and your roots here in DC, and we'll kind of start backwards and we'll get to the present. Let's start there. So you're a native of DC.
Yep, native of DC. Grew up in Northwest DC. A lot of people who are around here will know, right to go to Third and Longfellow, just down the street from George Avenue. Missouri Avenue is our backyard. That big highway going back and forth. It was great growing up in DC at that time. I think it was just a cool place. It was there during the time, and not to be all old granddad on you, but you could go out and play. In the summertime, you just open the door, go out and play with your friends and a ball, and you come back in when it gets dark. And it was just a wonderful place to grow up. And I've always had even though I grew up here, I've always had a love and a reverence for Washington D.C. It still gives me chills, to see the Capitol dome in a certain light, or every time I come in from the airport and come across Memorial Bridge and you see the Lincoln Memorial. And now knowing that, when you come and you make that turn from the airport, on one end of that bridge is Arlington Cemetery, and now both of my parents are in Arlington Cemetery. Oh, wow. And you have the Lincoln Memorial on the other side. Those are two parents who came from segregated South Carolina, to fulfill the American dream, and you have the Lincoln Memorial on the other side. And I would say that guy made it possible for those guys. And, those are the types of things you think about when you're in DC. It really affects me. I take it all seriously. So it's kind of an honor, to be participating in the democratic process through journalism in any case.
Yeah, wow. I would imagine that there's not too many folks that can say that are natives of this city, that still live in this city, and both of their parents are at Arlington National Cemetery. I would imagine that's unusual.
It's special. My father's flag, my father served, and his flag is right over there, on the other side. I have, as you can see, some mementos around here, but that one means a lot. But it was my dad who would take us around in DC, and growing up in DC would, drive us around and take us down to Haynes Point. And I didn't even know there were golf courses down at Haynes Point until I was in my 20s. We used to go down there just to hang around and be by the water and catch a breeze and, play kickball and stuff. That was what Haynes Point was in East Potomac Park. I didn't even know there were golf courses down there. But, it was a very nice, as I say, growing up in DC. I went to Sidwell Friends School. Some people know that one. I was actually the first African-American male to go K through 12 at Sidwell. I came in the year that Sidwell integrated. And it was a very small, a wonderful environment, especially through kindergarten and middle school. I had a graduating class of 84, and of that class, 23 of us had been together since kindergarten. They're still like brothers and sisters. Now we can get together on Zoom and Facebook and that sort of thing. So it's always nice to have those connections.
That's pretty incredible. So first African-American man to go K through 12 at Sidwell Friends. Most folks around here are very familiar with the Sidwell Friends. I know I used to play basketball in their gyms and some of the summer leagues and that sort of thing. But nationally, if people hadn't heard of it already, they certainly did when Sasha and Malia attended.
Yeah, there were other, and that was the thing. You grew up with these kids, and I didn't know any better. We didn't. The Quaker education was also so much about not having the identity from the name or from the face or anything, or even from the status. So for me, you'd be playing next to Dan Rather's kid or Walter Cronkite's godson or this guy, that guy, and I didn't even know who they were. Some other people would tell me who they were. And I was like, okay, this is just some bunch of kids that I beat, in races and on tests. I don't care. We're all just good friends, and we grew up together. But I'll tell you this one story about how that sort of got an inkling to it. A buddy of mine who lived up on the corner, and his mom was a domestic servant. She was a housekeeper, and he came out to play one day, and he had a new baseball glove. He said, "Hey, check out my new baseball glove." And it's like, yeah, I looked at it. It's like, well, it's not quite new. It's like, yeah, but it's almost brand new. And it was a beautiful baseball glove. It was better than anything any of us had, Sure. And I looked at it. It was a little bit too big for him. And I looked at the back of the hand, and there was a name written across the back of it. And I was like, is this, I don't want to say guy's name. I say, do you know this guy? And he's like, yeah. And I recognized it as the name of a guy who went to school with me and who was 3 years ahead of me in school. So that I realized, my situation was a little different because my best friend's mom is actually working in this guy's house, and the son had given her the glove to give to her son, which ended up on my block. Oh, wow. So in DC, I always say I grew up on, there's sort of an east side, west side thing with me, from one side of the park where I lived and the other side of Rock Creek Park, where I went to school. It was sort of a dual life here in DC. Right. But it also gave me a grounding that I appreciate how people are. People are different. Everybody's worthwhile. Everybody's story. I just got a love of people of all kinds. I didn't grow up in any one particular situation. I grew up in a lot of different situations. So I think that served me well then, and it serves me well now. And being open to people, no matter what their story is, no matter where they come from.
But that must have given you a particularly unique perspective, especially because we're talking late 70s.
Yeah, I'm old.
And I only know that I saw your LinkedIn that you graduated. You were a Terp class of '84, so I took a guess. But back then, even more so. I mean, one of the, I don't know what the right adjective, but unfortunate things about Washington D.C. is that it's a fairly segregated city, or used to be even more so, and certainly. Typically, west of the park was one thing, east of the park was another. So I imagine living on one side and going to school on the other, it certainly gave you a unique perspective.
Yeah, there's a movie in there somewhere, so that about living and growing up in the two different worlds. But as I say, it was edifying for me, because you grew up not being intimidated by anyone. You just like on my own merits. I was in that school on my own merits. I excelled in that school on my own merits. I excelled at the playground down the street from me too. So it's like everywhere you go, it's just you. You're not worried about I've never worried about what anybody thinks of me. It's just me, and I'm gonna just judge you in the same way, but not judge you, just accept you in the same way.
Right. So after Sidwell Friends, I touched on it for a second. You went to College Park, so you're a Terrapin.
Yeah, I'm a Terp. Went there. Thought I was going to be trying to play basketball. So I started in '80, and the class of '80 incoming, University of Maryland, College Park was preseason ranked #1 in the country. They had Albert King, Buck Williams, Jeff Baxter. It was just an absolutely loaded team, and I went out for walk-on tryouts, and I made it to the last cut because I took a charge from Ernie Graham. If you remember, big Ernie Graham, 6'7" point guard, about 230 pounds, out of Dunbar, and he was a rising junior that year. And I say rising because he left his boot print right here in my chest. That's probably still there if I take off this sweater. And Lefty Drizel, who was the coach at the time, said that boy got guts, So I made it to the last cut, but. The funny thing is, between my freshman and sophomore year, I grew 4.5 inches. So I didn't go back out for ball, but I started playing a bunch of ball. And it was my thought that maybe I could be John Starks, and go to the D League and make my way up and ride the bus down there. But I ended up taking another path and not doing that thing. And I played ball overseas for a little while, but I went overseas. Yeah. I took another route.
So you clearly can play. I mean, making the final cut at a preseason '1 ranked team in the country, and an old Lefty, almost giving you a spot. I mean, you could clearly play.
I was Rudy. Okay, believe me, I was. I was the guy. I'm sure that they were fast breaking. Lefty was like, "Hey, let's see if you're gonna take that charge again." It was just it was like that. I did get to be a pretty good ball player, and my younger brother is really the ball player. In the family. That guy, he had all America's last pro type talent. The tumblers on the block have to work just right for that to happen for you. But he's the guy who went to 5-star. He was really a good player. But I made myself as good a player as I could be, and I figured that if I really wanted to, I could have gone ahead and done that. But I got an offer to go to Hong Kong from a very close friend, a mentor of mine. Who also passed away, and I still miss him. He asked me at the time, he was doing something in Hong Kong in foreign exchange banking. And I was doing this entrepreneur thing in DC and buying and selling cars. He says, well, how about coming to Hong Kong? I said, well, fine, I'll go to Hong Kong. I thought I was going to go for a year, ended up staying overseas for 12 years and living in Hong Kong for 5 years, Vienna for 5 years, and London for 2 years. And again, everybody needs to travel. If there is a charity that I want to do, is to give kids passports when they're 10 and let them earn through grades and good works air miles so that they can travel. Everyone needs to get out of here and see the world, because it changes your perspective, your attitude. There's a fullness to your human experience when you travel like that. So I'm so grateful that happened for me. And still, no golf in this story.
Right. I was going to say, I was like, A, I couldn't agree more. B, unfortunately, most people aren't getting that experience this year in 2020 with such little travel happening.
No.
And C, golf is a great way to do that. Starting to bring golf into this conversation.
Absolutely.
To achieve the travel and see the world and see unique places. But one of the reasons golf hasn't been in the conversation yet is I've heard on a couple of your shows you talk about you came to the sport fairly late in life.
Yeah, I was 39 turning 40 when I came to the sport. I'd come back from overseas and had a very tough year in the family. My older brother passed away. My mom got sick. My dad got sick. It seemed like I lost cousins. It was just a crazy year 2000. And I needed a job where I had some flexibility to things. So I took a job at a golf magazine that needed an assistant editor. So I said, pretty much communications is my thing. I can write about, whatever.
Mhm.
So I took the job working there. And after a couple of months of having one of my clients be the 3 golf courses down in DC, golf course specialists, they were taking advertising in this golf magazine. You probably remember Pros and Hackers. Remember that magazine?
Oh yeah, I do.
Yeah. So I was associate editor for, or associate publisher for Pros and Hackers way back in the day. And one of our clients was the golf courses at DC. So Kim Thomas, who's the managing director there, is still like a sister to me. I would take a bullet for her. She was sort of running the operation. After, she would ask me for some marketing tips every now and then. And after like the third one, I says, well, look, I'll give you this one, but after this, I got to charge you. To which she says, okay, which led to me becoming the marketing manager at that place, which allowed me some flexibility. I still needed to take care of family for a little while, but that's really how I got into the game. Practically was not even, I wasn't playing golf at that time. I just took the job as the marketing and communications director for golf course specialists.
So some of this I think will be interesting to a lot of our listeners. First off, Pros and Hackers. So I remember Pros and Hackers. I remember it. I don't remember it super well. I remember reading it. I remember seeing it around. It would be on the coffee table at the golf course, or on the stand when you walked in. What years? What years did that exist? And that primarily covered golf in the Mid Atlantic, right?
Yeah, it was golf in the Middle Atlantic. And God, forgive me that I can't. I probably could pull one from out here someplace and get the first publishing date. I worked there for a couple of years. Okay. And I believe that the publication ran for somewhere between 7 years, something like that. Maybe.
But this is the 90s.
Yeah. This is it started in the 90s and went into the mid 2000s, I think. And so, but what came first? You getting into golf, or you starting to work at Pros and Hackers? Me starting to work at Pros and Hackers.
Interesting. So that's kind of what led to everything else.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had actually been on a golf course a couple of times, in a corporate tournament or something like that. But I still had played 2 18-hole rounds in my whole life, up until then.
And so Pros and Hackers, they must have, I don't know if competed is the right word, but at the time, Washington Golf Monthly was a publication as well. And they were not affiliated, right?
No, they were not affiliated. They were definitely competition. And the Washington Golf Monthly / Golf Styles was definitely the leading magazine by a long way. But Pros and Hackers sought to be sort of the scrappy young player on the field and try to cover stories in a different way. And I remember my first golf interview was with Rich Lerner. I found out somehow that Rich Lerner was coming into town, and it was my very first media piece was writing about Rich Lerner, and he gave me an interview. He actually didn't quite come to town. We met someplace around Havre de Grace or something like that. Okay. And we did the interview. And I remember I compared him to Joe DiMaggio because he kind of makes it look easy. He's got that silky smooth kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he saw the story and he said, Michael, you should really come down here. We could use a guy like you down here in Florida. And I was still, sort of taking care of family. I had stuff to do in Washington, D.C. And that path didn't take, but it always told me, that was the first hint that, maybe you can do something, in this golf thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. So you over to start working for golf course specialists. So for folks that maybe know that or are trying to remember how to place that, golf course specialists was the concessionaire that ran Langston, East Potomac, and Rock Creek, the 3 public courses in DC for, I don't even know, 20, 30, maybe something years. I'm going to say off the top of my head, it was, it's going to be 40 plus years. 40 plus years. 40 plus years, definitely 40 plus years. And now that's transitioned over to National Links Trust as of just a couple months ago.
Yeah, just recently.
So that's interesting. So you worked for them for how long?
I was there for 7 years in the position of director of marketing, communications, and public relations, and also lobbying, government relations, because we had to work with the National Park Service and also with the Department of Interior. So anything that was communications related, anything that involved everything from our newsletter to the signage in the grill, everything from meeting with the Deputy Secretary of the Interior to, actually, unplugging a toilet. We did it all. I mean, when you're in a situation like that, you have a small committed group of people And the mission is not to make a bunch of money. The mission for those golf courses has always been to provide affordable, accessible golf to the residents of Washington, D.C. and the surrounding area. And, when you're offering rounds that are, at the time, it was like $30 for 18 in a cart. I mean, you're operating on a shoestring, so you learn how to do a little bit of everything. And those were 70-hour days those are still my family, the people that I work with there at all three golf courses. We went through a lot together. We suffered together. We suffered, really through joys, weddings, literally weddings, funerals, personal tragedies. I almost literally gave my life, for those golf courses. So I got very emotional, when they changed hands, because that was my place.
That's it's certainly understandable. So speaking of that, what are your thoughts? Do you have a relationship with the new with National Links Trust?
Yeah. I spoke to the guys. I've spoken to Will and a bunch of the folks who were down there. Tim's also on the board. I congratulate them, because one of the things that I tried to do for 6 of the 7 years that I was at the DC golf courses was try to put together a public-private partnership and convince the leadership within the National Park Service and the Department of Interior that was actually legal. So, we failed. There was something that we could try to do, but there was no one who would say, yes, that's okay to do. So however it happened, they got someone to say yes to something that was a solid no before. And you need to have a public-private partnership like that to make it work if you're going to try to do the types of things that they want to do, expanding the golf courses. I have binders of things that have roughly the same plan, for the things to do and the ways to do them. But you have to have someone to shake hands with. And sure. I think they're to be congratulated for finding someone to shake hands with down there and get these things done. It's going to be a long process. We're talking, 10 years, before everything that they're planning gets done. And then once you get done, it's sort of like the Washington Cathedral. Once you get finished with it, the first thing that starts the next day is the restoration project, right? Sure. So that's what it's going to be with the golf courses. But to have someone who has a 50-year lease that allows you to make improvements, these are the nuts and bolts things that people don't see behind the scene that are absolutely necessary to make something like this work. So yeah, I have a relationship with them, maybe working with them, maybe reporting on them. But either way, I plan to make sure that mission and vision are attained by hook or by crook. Yeah,
especially, one of the things we're going to get to in this conversation, referring back to kind of your open letter to golf and how that pertains to Langston and the importance of Langston and where it sits in the history of African Americans and the sport of golf, and making sure that that lineage and that is respected and honored going forward for decades to come. I'm sure I would have to imagine is very high on your radar.
Definitely. Yeah, I went over to Langston the last day of the golf course specialist contract. I was writing a story for the USGA about the course turnover and how the USGA was going to be involved in the maintenance and setting up the maintenance program for the current situation, and then the renovations going forward, restorations going forward. And it was really an emotional thing. Again, I have to say, because the word that pops to mind is stewardship. When you're responsible for something that has that much history, you're looking and you can point out to the USGA and say, hey, that's the tree that, Joe Louis used to hit, the Joe Louis tree, because he used to come out here and hit that tree every single time. Sure. Where you saw a putting green where you got Muhammad Ali right behind me. A lot of people don't know Muhammad Ali, when he was Cassius Clay, came up to that golf course and just pulled up, didn't play golf, and pulled up to the putting green right up front. Of course, there's a crowd that gathered around him. It's like, champ. And he's like, what do I do? You're playing golf? Yeah, champ, you're playing golf. He's like, let me try this thing. And somebody puts down a ball. He's like, what are we supposed to do? So just hit it right there, champ. Just hit it right there. Pulls out a putter, rolls in a 30-foot putt. First putt he did, rolls in a 30-foot putt. Place goes nuts. And, got back in his Cadillac and said, okay, I guess I can play golf too. And off he goes. These are the stories. Then you have Teddy Rhodes, who taught Lee Elder, who taught Charlie Sifford. Both those guys taught Lee Elder. You have the history of African American golf is so richly wound into that. And into that neighborhood. And although I grew up in Northwest, I was born about a 5-wood away from the back fence of hole number 7 over there on Bladensburg Road.
At DC General?
At Langston. Actually, right there, we grew up right there on West Virginia Avenue.
Okay.
On West Virginia Avenue.
That's why I had not heard that story about Cassius Clay.
Yeah.
And I had earlier on this show, I sat down with Ernie Andrews, the pro down at
Big Ern, yeah,
who's been there forever, and he shared some stories, and it's ironic he didn't share that story, but he shared the story about another champ, Mike Tyson, coming by and having some wings. He didn't play golf, but he had some wings and grilled and loved it. But yeah, I'm sure there's just a ton of stories that only really exist and can be brought to life through conversations like this.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So sticking with Langston for a second, on one of your, I don't remember which one, because I've listened to a bunch of your 19th hole shows in tandem, especially over the last few days, just kind of prepping for this conversation. But on one of them, you had talked about how your time there, you had reached out to the PGA a number of times about maybe trying to do some kind of partnership or some kind of benefit specifically for Howard University, which is now happening, and as most people are well aware, with Steph Curry and rejuvenating their golf program there. Can you elaborate on what you were referring to there?
Well, it had been on our radar to support golf at Howard for quite some time, and it wasn't necessarily my idea. I think the management had that idea. And when I took over the job, that was one of the tasks to try to bring it to fruition. So, the credit goes to them, to guys like, again, Bob Rock, who was the managing partner or the majority owner at that time, Kim Thomas, Jimmy Garvin, who was the manager at Langston at those times. Those guys were very committed to doing everything they could in the community. And we gave away so much golf. Sometimes it felt like we were giving away as much golf to organizations, the First Tee, to high schools, colleges. We were giving away as much as we sold. But that was all good because that was part of the mission, right? Mm-hmm. So we, on several occasions, said, hey, look, let's work on getting a Howard golf team. Let's get that together because it's an elite university and it should have the golf team, and we'll have the facilities. This can be your home course. This can be where you play. This can be where you practice, all of these things. And like every deal, you hear me say this all the time, you probably get tired of me saying it, but for any deal to work, you have to have two hands shaking. You have to have someone to shake hands with. And we just couldn't, on a consistent basis, get enough parties together to supply the money, the support, the PR, all those things that need to happen. It's like a golf game, you got 3 out of 4 things working and you shoot a 90. But one of the days, the putter works, and you're 2 under par. So what happened with the Howard thing now is, you had this entity with all this gravity called Seth Curry, who brings people to the table, and they don't want to leave until they make it work. So again, kudos to them making it work, and whatever I can do to support it, I'm happy to do.
Is it as great as it is? Is it surprising or maybe, I don't know, frustrating is the right word, that it took a celebrity from a different sport to make that happen?
No, it's not surprising. The money makes these things work, right? You can have all of the fuel around you want to, but that money, the and the impetus, and maybe even the celebrity, is a spark. Sure. We know what makes these things happen by and large, and it's difficult to make things happen in DC. DC, there's so many people that get involved, so many jurisdictions, so many people who have to say yes, and so many people who, if even one of them says no, then it's a done deal. Just forget about it. Try again next year or next decade. So I am not bitter at all that it didn't happen on my watch. I'm glad that it happened. Yeah, no, and it's exciting. It really is. I think a lot of people are really excited for what will come of that, and just that Howard was going to have a golf team again, and got Sam Puryear in, who I haven't met yet, but I want to chat with, and it seems like he really knows what he's doing, and so all of that's really exciting. Absolutely. So you spent 7 years working there, and then so after that time, at what point did you transition to, I don't know, if front of the camera or front of the microphone, being really a part of golf media as opposed to your experience as a publisher at Pros and Hackers? Well, it was during the time I was at Golf Course Specialist and managing the golf courses that I started doing some radio and television. Again, communications has been my bailiwick. And even when I was overseas, I did some TV work there. I did a bunch of voiceover work. I was the voice of Ford Motors in all of Southeast Asia. So whenever you saw an English language Ford commercial, it would be my voice going, the new Ford Telstar, something like that. So it was, I've always been very comfortable in front of a microphone and a camera, that sort of thing. So there were two things that sort of pushed that along. One thing was Dave Lucas, my good friend Dave Lucas,
Sure.
over at Capital Golf Weekly,
Yep.
asked me to come on to do a couple of spots with him. And then he asked me to be sort of a regular contributor. And then he asked me to be kind of a co-host. So I sort of grew into that role. And Dave, again, I keep saying he's like a brother to me, but that guy is like a brother to me. Okay.
Is he still hosting that show?
No, the show, I think went off the air, I'm going to say 3 years ago, whenever Sinclair took it over. It wasn't much longer after that it went away, which is sad because that was one of those things that really wove the fabric of wove through the fabric, I should say, of Washington, D.C. golf. Everybody loved Dave Lucas. Everybody knew that theme song, the smooth jazz theme song comes on, plays about 6 times over the course of the weekend.
And for folks that aren't familiar with it, this was on News Channel 8. It was a weekly show for years and years and years, right?
I'd say I ventured 20 years. It couldn't be much less than that. But Dave was just effortless. And people didn't even understand. He was literally like the duck on the water. He's gliding across the water. But this guy would be covering, like bombs going off in Iraq, flip off his mic, run upstairs to the other studio, sit behind the mic and just do the, hey, welcome to another edition of Capital Golf Weekly. I'm Dave Lucas. It's like, how did you do that, bro? He's like, I learned a lot from Dave. I learned a lot about composure. I learned a lot about preparation. I learned a lot about how to book and be on time for things, how to make it happen week after week after week, no matter what, because you said you would. That's why you do it, because you said you would. Mm-hmm. I learned so much from that guy doing that show.
And so your time on that show, is that when you really started to get afforded opportunities to travel in golf and kind of expand your network outside of the DC area?
No, that sort of came after I left Golf Course Specialist. So so that whole story is, again, I was working with Golf Course Specialists for the 7 years. And these were really, we do routinely, 50, 60 hour weeks. And then sometimes we were doing an RFP at 70, 80 hour weeks and that sort of thing. And there was one week where by accident, you may remember this, our head superintendent, a great guy, accidentally reached for the fertilizer bottle and instead reached for the Roundup bottle. And I can tell you one thing for the Monsanto people, Roundup works, okay? Because he, in thinking we were fertilizing courses, out of our 72 holes we ran or something, I think 54 of them got sprayed with Roundup.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, so people were like picking up big patches of grass. Now, this happened just after we'd had the first Play Golf America Day with 2,000 people on our golf course down at East Potomac. And I saw some browning going on. I thought, well, maybe it's just hot. But a few days later, we started picking up big patches of grass. Now, normally grass dying on a golf course is not a big deal. Somehow the local news coverage got a hold of it. So now we have news trucks down there. It's like live from 6. Hey, I'm down here at East Potomac Golf Course where the courses have been nuked. And they're holding up big patches of grass. We've had the AP pick it up for one news cycle. And like my greatest accomplishment in PR is killing a story on AP because they had a slight irregularity in it. And so they pulled it. And that almost never happens. That's my greatest achievement.
Well done. Did the courses have to close for a while because of that?
No, we kept them open. We shipped in sod from Michigan. We cut prices. We let people play for free at some time, but we were staying. I mean, I was up 24 hours a day for probably 3 straight weeks. The reason I tell the story is because I was in front of the media all the time. And again, I learned about being accurate, being relentless, being on point, how to negotiate things with the media, what I would do if I was on the other side. That sort of prepared me for doing that. And kind of the reason that I left Golf Course Specialist, one of the reasons was that, during that episode, I woke up one morning and it felt a little bit tired. And someone called me, and I could hear him talking. He was asking me something on a Sunday morning. Some reporter asked me about what's the update on the golf courses. And it's like, dude, just call me tomorrow. Okay, here's the shorts. Call me tomorrow. Guy calls me back again, and I pick up, and I'm going, hello? And he's going, hello? I hang up, says, I guess we had a bad connection. He calls again. I go, hello, hello? He's going, hello. I realize that I can hear him, but he can't hear me because I've completely lost the ability to speak. I was having a stroke.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I had completely lost the ability to speak. And then I started feeling the weakness on the right side. And that's the only way that I knew, because that guy called.
Oh my
and because I'd had some history with that sort of thing with my mother and father, I sat down, told myself I needed to calm myself down, took a bet that it was a blockage instead of a bleeder, and went in the bathroom and swallowed 6 aspirin. My son, who was, I guess, 10 at the time, I woke him up and managed to squeak out, need go hospital. And yeah, it was a recovery period from that one. Obviously, I got back my ability to speak, and thank God. Any differences, as my doctor always says, is like any differences in your abilities, only you know it. Okay, we can't see it, but there's still some things that I see. But because of that, I said, let me try to do some things that I think I want to do for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I left, and that's when I got into the journalism more full time.
Wow. Well, that is scary, but obviously glad. I mean, obviously a full recovery. So I mean, and how many years ago was this?
That was going on 11 years ago now.
11 years. Wow. Glad that it obviously wasn't more serious than it was, but that is really scary.
Yeah, it was. It's something, because you're sitting there in the hospital, and your son's sitting beside you, and I was just thinking to myself, I couldn't talk, off and on for most of the night. I couldn't make a sound. Yeah. My whole speech center, when the doctor shows me the MRI, it's like, yep, that's your speech center right there. Yeah. That was affected, and I'm thinking, what if I can't talk? What do I do if I can't communicate? Because that's kind of my thing. Right. Do I take up carpentry? Am I a puppeteer now? What do I do? Right. I worked my way back, because I always tell somebody, it's like, those games where you have the word magnets on your refrigerator and you make sentences and that sort of thing. That's sort of been me with communication. I told people, it's like if I had a refrigerator door that's 5 miles wide, I have a sentence prepared for anything. That's my vocabulary. And it's like somebody drove a pickup truck right down the middle of it and just scattered. For a long time, I had to reach for words. The day after, I remember they got up, and like 4 doctors came in my room, and they were testing me on things. What's your name? Michael Williams. Where are you? Georgetown Hospital. What day is it? August, whatever. What time is it? Looked at the clock, and it's like 7:30, and they all just looked up like this, like, oh, I'm sorry, it's 3 to 10. I lost the ability to tell time. Wow. Couldn't look at the clock and tell time. Oh. After that came back, it was scary, but it made me. It helped me to say that here's let me get onto the things that I can do better and participate in a way where I can be. Because I was good, at the golf course management thing, but I always felt like in journalism, that's where I can be world class. I can be as good as anybody who does it. So that sort of pushed me into that.
Well, yeah, and you're proving that these days. So let's fast forward that a bit. So now when did you hook up with GolfWRX and launch what you're doing today, which is hosting the 19th hole?
Right. So I started off with sort of golf travel, right? Well, let's see. I got my first radio show with the old WMET, which was called Sticks and Stones. And I would have lots of people on the show, but I would have government people. It was about, I wanted to do something like what you're doing. It's kind of an early version of what you're doing, Beltway Golfer. We have politicians and all sorts of people. It was the first year that they had women on the Big Break. And so we got the Big Break women on the show. Right after they rotated off the show, we would be their first interview. Then I got an opportunity to work with, I ran Playboy Golf for a couple of years, which was an experience because I got to go to the Playboy Mansion twice and drink tequila shots with Hugh Hefner's wife and with Gronk. And, again, that's something for the book.
What does that even entail? What was Playboy Golf? What did they do? Was this articles or events? Like, I don't.
Yeah, Playboy Golf was a series. It was like the Playboy Golf Scramble. They would go to like 13, 15 different cities across the U.S. and hold these scrambles that you would enter. And the teams that finish in first and second get invited to a regional thing. And then those winners get to go invited to Los Angeles for the national finals, where you would play 2 rounds of golf at a great golf course. If you remember, if you're an Entourage fan, the place where the turtle met Tom Brady, that's the course where you played.
I remember that. I don't remember what course it was, but
I can't remember off the top of my head. It was Pacific something. It's in Pacific Palisades, but it was that golf course.
Okay.
And you got to go to the Playboy Mansion during that week. It's a week-long thing. You got to go to the Playboy Mansion twice. So you get to go to the Playboy Mansion for a pool party on Thursday.
That's the big payoff of getting people to enter the tournament series. Is that it's like the World Series of Poker, but you get to go to the Playboy Mansion.
I admit it didn't suck. I mean, people think it was like sort of like a Playboy Mansion. It was like a real bawdy or todgy or something like that. It was basically like a bunch of girls in cheerleader outfits, you know. And it was about the golfers. It was to raise money. It was to make money. That thing. These guys, an outside group, ran it. But I worked for them for a while, just because I had some promotional skills and to get into golf. And then I got the show on WJFK. Right? That was my first version of the 19th hole. Okay. And I did for 4 years, almost 5 on WJFK. We had some great shows, and we had Jack Nicklaus, Gary Player, Leisure. I mean, everybody who you would expect.
WJFK was 106.7 before the fan bought it, or became the fan.
It was the fan.
Oh, it was the fan.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yep,
okay.
It was a fan. Yep, it was back when they were still over in the Laurel Bowie area, before we moved downtown, and I moved downtown with them. So I was sort of straddled that era. We were on Saturday mornings, and that's when I really got my first chance to do broadcast radio to a large audience. Okay. And when WJFK said they want to concentrate more on the Redskins and use that hour, in the morning for something else, then I went to GolfWRX and said, hey, I got this show, I got this format, I got these guests, I got these contacts. Would you like to put this on the show and really expand the audience? And that was 4 years ago. So 4 years, and as of today, 144 episodes later, we are rocking and rolling. I think we get something like 40,000 listens every week, and sometimes more. When you have major weeks, that sort of thing. But we've had everybody from Jack Nicklaus to Bernard Langer to we had the ambassador to Ireland, who's a friend of mine. I met him in Ireland before he came to the U.S. I like to have people who think about golf my way. That golf is not just a game. It's not just what the tour is doing. Golf is not just a lifestyle. It can be a life. You can meet so many wonderful people and go so many wonderful places. And that's what I try to show people on the 19th hole. It's not just about the golfers. It's about you and how you connect to golf. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that.
Absolutely. It's a really enjoyable show, and
I appreciate it.
that's really impressive. I mean, I am not in the stratosphere of 40,000 listeners per show, so that's very impressive. I would imagine that a particular episode earlier this year got a significantly more than that, which was a week or two after the killing of George Floyd, and you wrote a letter titled "An Open Letter to the Golf Industry," I believe. Is that right?
An open letter to the golf industry from a black man who loves the game.
From a black man that loves the game. And you published it in the GolfWRX on their website. You post. I saw at the time you posted. That's where I caught wind of it, was when you posted to your social media. And then you had a conversation with Damon Hack on your show, kind of about just kind of the everything going on and kind of the temperature of the country and the golf industry. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the letter, because in that letter, you call out the golf industry, but in particular the PGA Tour, pretty specifically, about almost like kind of not being prepared with a better response at the time, or being prepared to kind of deal with some of these issues. And then fast forward a couple months later, Jay Monahan sat down with you face to face, or I don't know about face to face, but came on your show and kind of talked through it. So I kind of want to hear your perspective on on the letter, what drove you to put it, the reaction from the industry or lack thereof. I'd love to just hear more about it.
Well, the impetus was obviously the murder of George Floyd, and who didn't that touch me, specifically because literally there, but for the grace of God. That could have been my son. So everybody was thinking about that. And of course, I'm thinking about it in my political context for the political work. And the thing that provoked me to write the letter specifically about golf was Jay Monahan's letter, his statement saying that, I don't want to try to quote it, but it alluded to the fact that they were searching for the right answers or searching for the right thing to do. And that sort of tweaked me because I thought, well, look, I've been in the industry and I've sat down with a bunch of people who are responsible for this. And I know that people have been looking for the right thing to do, or at least saying that they're sitting down at meetings and looking for the right thing to do for a long, long, long time. So there should be, to me, a binder that says, in case of racial emergency, break glass. There should be something like that sitting out there, or at least some sort of response to this to say, here's what we are doing. And his bafflement baffled me. And that's why I wanted to write the article to say, well, here's what I think. Here's what I think the issues are, at least some of the issues are. And even more importantly, to try to put together some solutions. Because one of the guys I worked with, a good friend of mine, Chad Harp, is a PR guy in Los Angeles, a really great guy. And he read my first draft of the letter and says, Michael, you need to put down the solutions too. You can't just write down the problems. You gotta flow with the solutions too. And I yeah, you're absolutely right. So the letter is a combination of first expressing my gratitude and wonderment still at the position that I hold in the golf industry after such short period of time. It's been amazing. Then to say that hasn't been the case for everyone, obviously, and that golf has somewhat of a checkered past when it comes to race and diversity. Here's what I see. Here's some things that can be done. Just low-hanging fruit. And it's interesting. One of the things I said was to recognize people of color for their lifetime accomplishments. Why isn't Calvin Keith in the Hall of Fame? He's the straightest hitter in the history of golf. You talk about starting late. That guy started playing golf in his 20s, in his early 20s. By his late 20s, he wins the Tour Championship. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And now you have Lee Elder, who's been invited to hit the first ball, but he's still not in the Hall of Fame, the World Golf Hall of Fame. He needs to be in there. So things like this. And promoting HBCU golf is one of the things we talked about. And Jay Monahan saw it. I had the response from every lettered organization in the industry has been in touch with me. And I mean, NGCOA, PGA of America, PGA Tour, USGA. The only people I haven't heard from is the RNA. And I get that, okay, because it's not on our shores. And I expect that I will be talking to them at some point. But they have all been responsive. And I think that the leadership of these organizations, their heart is in the right place. And it's difficult when you have to bring a culture that has an old world ethos part and parcel into the 21st century. Parts of this game are still haven't made it to the 20th century. Let's be honest.
Sure.
Okay. But Jay was honest and recognized that and sat down with me, as you said, and talked about it. And to his credit, he gave me his personal email and phone number. It says, look, you got a thought, call me first. Okay, I want to hear from you first. And he will. I heard that from a lot of the leadership, Susie Whaley and Seth Watt, the PGA, from all the guys, John Bodenhammer and all the guys over at the USGA. They've all been very responsive and very receptive. And I look forward to working with them on this thing because it's not a moment, it's a movement. We have to keep this going forward.
Sure. That was going to be my next question. That's fantastic that they've all reached out and that they're you've gotten that response. I'm just kind of curious with oftentimes when there's these type of large events and movements, once it kind of drifts away from the front page, people forget about it. And now that we are, May, we're now in November, 6 months down the road, is it still being talked about? Have there been, you had that conversation with the commissioner in August or September or something like that. Have you seen any indicators since that says, okay, things are actually happening and there's not just words?
Yeah, there are things that are happening. I think maybe the most significant and easy to understand is the announcement by the PGA Tour that they're committing $100 million in philanthropic funds to organizations that promote diversity and the betterment of circumstances for people of color in the neighborhoods where they hold tournaments across the country. So it's not just about, hey, let's do another first tee or let's get, where black kids playing golf. That's been done. Let's see if we can get better health facilities, if we can get bookmobiles, if we can sort of bring equity to the situation for more people, because once you don't have to think about where your next meal is coming from, maybe you can start to worry about making it tea time. To their credit, they understand that one comes before the other.
Sure.
But there are other things that are happening, and I think as things come together and there are meaningful announcements to make, you'll hear more.
Yeah.
But people are working on it.
One of the things, you had asked Damon Hack in that interview or that discussion that you had with him immediately after, and you asked Jay Monahan about Tiger specifically, and kind of his role, and the commissioner's response was interesting, basically saying, he does a tremendous amount that people don't see. And it was almost like he was saying, he doesn't really need to say anything because of how much he does. That's just not on the front pages, and doesn't make headlines, and isn't necessarily quotable. Is that enough from Tiger, being of the stature that he has, and the role and the impact that he could have?
Look, I mean, again, you see the picture on the wall I have back here. There's this guy. I grew up with guys like this, and Bill Russell, and John Carlos, and Tommy Smith, and Jim Brown. These are athletes who used their platform to advance others. That was just their sensibility. That was in their moral makeup. Tiger's in another generation, and I don't think it's not necessarily in him to be that particular guy, to approach a situation and provoke change through conflict and confrontation. That's not who he is. It's never going to be who he is. But, he's a grown-ass man. He can do whatever he wants to. What you can do is point out to him, hey, look, there's your opportunity. There is an opportunity for you to do this through your words and your actions. You choose what you decide to do. And he's chosen to do it quietly through certain things. And, again, when you get a guy like Kirk Triplett, just wrote a story about Kirk Triplett, who puts a Black Lives Matter sticker on his bag and gets, all kinds of vile, vitriol is hurled at him, on the internet and in person, because the guy has a black son. He adopted a black kid and says, hey, Black lives actually do matter. Yeah. And he gets all this understanding. So I understand that there's a price to be paid, in that golf community for that sort of, what passes for activism, in that community. Just saying and doing the right thing is categorized as activism. That's not who he is, okay? But we don't need him to be that. But somebody has to be. Somebody has to step forward and say that. Me, I got into the game late. The whole industry, sort of says, we're done with you, Michael. Okay, so be it. If they do that for me telling the truth, I'm fine. I can live with that, because the one thing I can't live with is hypocrisy. Ask anybody who knows me. That's my battle. Okay, that's my Don Quixote thing. I don't truck hypocrisy. Not my thing.
So almost not speaking of Tiger, but in that letter, you also brought up a story in your open letter to golf about a PGA Tour player telling a story at the U.S. Open in Pebble Beach, who I learned later when you wrote an article about it and your relationship with him, that it was Charles Howell, but about him donning blackface as a joke the night that Tiger got in trouble with Ellen. And he told this in front of a large room of media and reporters, where you were the only African American in the room, and you confronted him on it. But he's turned that into a learning experience, it sounds like, and you have a relationship with him now. Can you tell us a little bit?
I do, and to just roll it back, I mentioned that, yes, in the letter that I wrote, I mentioned that story. And it's interesting because when I talked to the PGA Tour, one of the first questions they asked me was, are you comfortable in sharing the name of that professional? And I wasn't at the time, because I knew I was still in the process of determining how this story was going to come out. The story was at the 2019 U.S. Open. I was invited there, and they have players for one of the sponsors. The players come in post-round and do a, sort of a post-round interview, that sort of thing. Player interviews are generally pretty boring stuff. But I thought, okay, you're invited, you go, be polite, show up. And it wasn't a room of reporters. Almost miraculously, I was the only member of the accredited media who was there. The rest of it was sort of customers and people who were in the orbit of that particular sponsor.
Oh, okay.
And again, Todd Lewis, who was doing a thing for the Golf Channel, sort of teed up this story for Charles, saying, "Hey, everybody, remember the night that Tiger ran his SUV into the fire hydrant?" Yeah, we do. Why are we talking about it now? And he teed up the story. Well, Charles had a funny story about living in Isleworth at the same time, and Charles went on to tell the story about how there were lots of media there, and he thought it would be funny to go in the house, and his quote was to put on as much shoe polish and other dark stuff as I can find, and a wig, and he got a blind to sit beside him in a different SUV and went rolling around trying to convince the media that he was Tiger. And this got nervous laughter from the room. I was sitting about 15 feet from him, and it was either I go to the back of the room or I'm going to leap at him. I mean, it was that type of visceral anger. I couldn't believe it, because this was at the time when the governor of Virginia was about to have to resign for a blackface picture they found with him like 25 years before. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so the story is that Charles gave a cursory apology there. I'm sorry if you were offended. And I think he truly was mystified that I was offended, because they'd asked him somewhat for a funny story. And I think he was sort of prompted to tell this story somehow. But the way you tell it, it's as if like it never occurred to him that there might have been something wrong with it. No. And I think you can be in a room, it would have been like water into sand had I not been in the room. There was nervous laughter in the room, which made me as angry as his statement were the people who laughed at that thing. So in the room, I said, I wanted to wait. I didn't want to blow it up because I was conflicted. I'm thinking, okay, I'm not here as media. I'm actually a guest in this thing, but I'm still media. And I'm also still, I'm a man living in this world. What do you say about something like that? You don't just let that go. So I tried to wait until everybody had their questions answered. The guests wanted to ask him stuff about his career and that sort of thing. And he took the last question, and I said, hey, I just want to say, Charles, number one, I admire your career. I think you've done a great job. 20 years, $40 million, that's A-okay, right? But don't you ever tell that story again, okay? Don't you ever do it. It's ignorant. It's embarrassing. And in 2 minutes, you could blow everything you've worked for, not only for the 20 years of your career, but for your entire life, okay? Do yourself a favor. Don't do that. And again, he was truly puzzled. They just asked me for a funny story. So it was that thing. And I talked to people at the sponsor, at the USGA, that sort of thing. And the thing for me was, am I going to tell this story now in the middle of the US Open, the tournament that I love? I love the USGA. I love the idea. And the USGA, I mean, think about it. The US Open at Pebble Beach. And Pebble Beach is celebrating their 100th anniversary, of being open. It was as big of a golf event as you're going to get, right. That and the Masters. Yeah. Do I blow that up to tell this story? I don't want to do it. However, if I do blow up this story, I take this to TMZ, I get $10,000 and 10,000 followers, overnight. So, you got the angels on the shoulder trying to. What I decided to do was to say, look, I don't think necessarily that this moment made this man. I'm not sure that that's exactly who he is. So I want to give it time, because he did apologize. And a number of people apologized. And I took it to be a sign that, look, let's see if we can establish who he is. I don't want to take away from the story for anybody who wants to read it, but he went through a personal hell. Once he understood that he had done something wrong, it took a lot of help and a lot of counseling to get not only the guilt, but actually some depression. Imagine seeing a character flaw like that in yourself and you have no idea that it exists. It would knock you for a loop too. But he came out of it to be a person who's an advocate for diversity, for equity, for fairness. He's a very, very genuine person. He's a Christian man. He's a man of faith. And I think he learned that you can do something wrong, recognize that, and come back from it. And that's the story that I wanted to tell. I always say in golf, you call it a mulligan. And in church, you call it grace. But whichever you want to call it, at some point, we all need another chance. And if you have the patience to be able to do it, and it comes out that that it's worth that redemption, that opportunity for redemption, well, those are the stories that take us forward. Those are those things that tie us together, because it's easy to tell a story that breaks us apart.
That's really well said, and I certainly encourage everyone to go read that article that you put up. It's on GolfWRX. I'll share it as well. And
that story's on the Undefeated. That story's on the Undefeated.
Oh, the Undefeated.
ESPN,
Okay.
The Undefeated.
Okay, you're right. Yeah, okay. The Undefeated. We'll share that link out. But also, good on you for making that decision of not, picking up the phone and calling TMZ or whoever else to just kind of get him in trouble and go the route that you took. So another thing I want to put on you in the conversation with Damon Hack, you brought up an organization that you've already mentioned a couple times here, which is the First Tee, which I thought was interesting. You didn't elaborate on it, and I saw on your profile that you spent some time with the First Tee, not a long period of time, but you spent some time with the First Tee. But the First Tee, I've never really heard anything. I don't know a ton about the First Tee. Admittedly, I volunteered one season with them, helping out with some kids down at Fort Belvoir. I follow them on social media. I know they're I know what they are. So it was interesting to hear you kind of have some strong feelings about the First Tee, and you didn't elaborate there. So I'm just curious if you could elaborate a little bit here about your experience on how you feel they've changed.
Well, the first experience that I had with First Tee was, again, working at the golf courses in DC, because we were we sort of domiciled the First Tee at that time. We gave them space for the kids' programs. We donated buckets of balls, instruction. Eventually, we donated office space, in one of the clubhouses where they could live and actually work the offices there. So the original mission of the First Tee was to bring golf to underserved communities. That was the original mission. And I think that they did some really good work in that area across the country. And it's a chapter-based organization. So different chapters, any type of organization like that, they have different flavors, different, I know they put emphasis on different things, if you will.
They each have their own leadership, right?
Exactly. They actually, and they have their charter they need to fulfill, and certain national benchmarks that they have to they have to meet. But
does that result in some chapters being more revenue driven than others?
I would say, more revenue driven. Yes, and sometimes because they have the ability to be so. I mean, when you're living in Washington, D.C., it's one of the wealthiest communities in the area, and you have a lot of people who are on your board. That it's really a very it's a blue ribbon type of board. A lot of people who are lobbyists and lawyers and very successful people in life. I think Kornheiser and Wilbon were on the board at some time when I was on there. And so they have the ability to hold fundraisers and things like that and do things. So they do it. I mean, it's in their DNA. That's what they do. It didn't work that well from the very beginning, but once they got a really good leadership group in there, they sort of kicked it into high gear. And it's that sort of Washington social thing, becomes a part of it. But that's not going to be the same thing in Newark, New Jersey.
Right.
That's not going to be the same thing in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
Necessarily. So they can have the same mission, but not have the same resources, let's say, to do things in a different way. I thought the organization was doing very well, and I think they've raised a lot of money, and they've consolidated. They used to be First Tee of Washington, D.C., which I was on the board of, and the First Tee of Montgomery County and Prince George's County. There's been a consolidation of the First Tees. Now it's the First Tee of Greater Washington. I'm not sure how far that reaches now, but it's probably, like the metro area, sort of halfway down to Richmond. It's considered the D.C. area now, right? So it's a very big chapter that has a very big endowment because they've raised a lot of money. My issue, I've left the board recently because I saw a change in the mission of the organization. I saw a practical change in that it seemed to be moving more from getting underserved communities into the game of golf to just getting kids into the game of golf. Let's be like the funnel, the feeder system for young people into the game of golf, so that golf doesn't become tennis, after the 70s, where everybody's playing and then all of a sudden nobody's playing, right? So that mission sort of changed and morphed. I left. We sort of parted ways mutually when that mission became official. When it was just, okay, this program is now about junior golf. It's about putting more golfers, on golf courses. And I said, well, that's a noble mission, but that's not what I signed up for. And I admit, with my travel and my schedule, I wasn't super involved in programming or anything like that anyway. I wasn't. But
that shift happened just for the First Tee of Greater Washington or all the chapters?
Nationally.
Okay.
nationally, the organization.
And fairly recently.
Yes, I do. Within the last 2 years.
Okay.
Within the last 2 years. And, when I mentioned that in that letter, a lot of people from chapters in across the country, I mean, from Detroit and Los Angeles, I got a lot of correspondence from people say, hey, were you talking about us? Because we still do this. We still, have this mission, for getting these kids, and other chapters that would say, look, we just did it because there was no other way for us to get sponsorship and to do events. We have to, raise money. We're a 501c3. How else can we get things? So people have their different challenges. I get it. I just felt that it was a different mission, and that the first mission isn't done yet. Okay, we still haven't done that. We haven't accounted for the fact that an NBA basketball guy, we had the NBA draft the other day, right? And that kid was standing up there in an ill-fitting suit and a baseball hat and a basketball, right? And that basketball could have been the one that he got when he was 10 years old for Christmas, and he's had it ever since. For somebody to be standing on the podium at the U.S. Open, okay, that's not going to happen. He's not going to be standing there with the clubs that he got when he was 10 years old. Okay, it takes a lot of money, a lot of resources. It takes probably $50,000 to $100,000 just worth of range balls to get him to be in the discussion about somebody who could possibly win on the PGA Tour. So somebody has to foot the bill for that. Something has to be accounted for the fact that in a sport that is talking about equity and involvement, and anybody can do this, there has to be equity of opportunity to get to it, and that really doesn't exist. So I think that's something that still needs to be addressed, and that's something that I'm interested in doing somehow.
Interesting. We had a gentleman. Are you familiar with Craig Kirby and golf?
I certainly am.
Yeah.
Yes.
I had him on the show a while back, and it sounds like he's trying to do something more aligned with their original mission with Golf My Future My Game. So hopefully, and I know he's working with National Links Trust, and hopefully his organization. Exactly. It's a good one to. For anybody listening, good one to try to support, and hopefully there's some more organizations like that will pop up, but that's interesting. That was just the first time I'd really kind of heard anybody take quite a hot take like that on the first tee. So I kind of raised some eyebrows, and I'm sure it ruffled some feathers, as you said, across the country within first tee.
A little bit.
Yeah. So before we wrap here, on a lighter note, before we wrap up, I really enjoyed a recent conversation that you had when you got to head out into the Atlantic Ocean to Bermuda and attend the Bermuda Classic and sit down with another local golf hero, Fred Funk, after he made the cut at the Bermuda Classic. Yeah. And so that I encourage everybody to go listen to that interview. It was great to hear you and Fred kind of rap about his career and him getting to play with his son. So that was really cool. Was that the first time you had kind of sat down with him for that kind of time?
Yeah, that was yes, for that type of time in an official way. Yeah, it was the first time. He was so forthcoming about it, and I love the way he sort of managed the conversation through talking about that experience at the golf course, and then talking about his equipment and what he uses and how his physical challenges were there. He didn't even feel like he was going to compete that week. I saw him on the airplane. I saw him in the hotel, and I thought he had a certain glow. I thought he had a certain bounce to his step, but it turns out that bounce was because he was in so much freaking pain. He was just sort of like walking gingerly, The guy was in total pain and didn't think he was really even gonna, wasn't sure he was gonna be able to get out there for the first round. He ends up making the cut, and that's golf, isn't it? And Freddie is just someone who's just performed year after year after year. He has that dedication. He's the proverbial grinder. Whatever it takes to get it done, with his body, with his equipment, mentally there. I just love talking to him, and he's just a great guy, super nice guy. Just some people you have to pull an interview out of, that.
Oh yeah,
and, yeah.
But he's not one of those people.
No. I mean, he's somewhere between Dustin Johnson, who I still my greatest journalism accomplishment is getting that guy to laugh into a microphone. Okay, he actually showed emotion. Okay. Which at the Masters was lovely to see him cry like that. It was awesome. I call it the greatest speech never given. But
how'd you make him laugh?
Somewhere between DJ and Gary Player. who's like, Gary, how you doing? And then you got 45 minutes.
How did you make DJ laugh?
I asked him, what did I ask him? He was at the TaylorMade session. I was interviewing him on the phone and asked the typical questions. He was giving DJ answers, someplace between 1 and 3 words. And then I asked him, hey, DJ, you baseball fans? Yeah, I am. You know, they got walk-on music, right? Yeah. What's your walk-on music, man? If we play walk-on music for your next tournament, what's your walk-on music? And he gave a big laugh at that. He says, let me think about that. And I can't even remember which songs where it was like, and there were two like really different things. One of them was like a deep rap song, and the other one was sort of like screech metal. It's like, okay, I feel you.
I wouldn't have pegged him for that.
Who would know anything about it?
Right.
But I tell you what, 2 things about that guy. He is super nice, as talented as the day is long, and Paulina Gretzky looks better in person. This is what I'm going to tell you.
Good to know.
So aim high, kids. Aim high.
He's got a lot going for him right now.
Yes, he does.
All right. So listen, this has been great. Last thing. So you live now in Montgomery County in Silver Spring. Where you still play much golf in the area?
I do. My favorite courses to play are either to sneak right over to Sligo, the little 9-holer just right up the street from me, or Northwest Park is up in Silver Spring, sort of just north of here, like 5 miles. And I believe that's still from the tips, the longest public course in Montgomery County, maybe the state. But it's super long, a great test. They keep it in great shape for the number of rounds that they get. Yeah. I'm not a country club kind of guy. Right. I played plenty in a normal year. I played plenty of golf traveling. But there hasn't been much this year, partially because obviously of COVID-19. Also because I tweaked the meniscus here, and I need to get a sawbones in there to clean that up. So once that gets done, I'll be back and flirting with the championship.
All right. Well, we'll leave it at there. I really appreciate you letting me ping you with questions, but it was great to learn more about your backstory and your history. And so thank you, Michael, for your time, and it's been a pleasure.
Hey, it's my pleasure, man. Next time, once we get rid of this bug, man, we'll do this in person, no?
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
I don't have a good golf game, but I don't really care. I'm a regular dude living in DC, and I want to know about DC-centric golf stuff. If you can tell me something that I don't already know, then that is great for me. I don't want the regular stuff. I want exciting stuff. I want different stuff. I want stuff I can't hear elsewhere. But I want it to be about DC golf.